Thank you very much, everyone. I'm glad to be here this evening and to address you and give you a sense of the state of the town from where I sit. I've got a few topics I would like to cover. I'll have some general comments on the town, and then I want to talk about a couple of our major projects, Henley Holmes Royal, as well as Great Island, and I've got a few other updates. And looking ahead to a few things that are coming, and then there are some folks that deserve some thank yous. So before I get started, the RTM recently had some technology upgrades, these wonderful microphones, and I think they've installed an oxygen system, so if these presentations get particularly boring, I think that'll drop out of the ceiling and help you, although I don't think my presentation is going to be boring. I think the ones that are very numbers intensive and the Board of Finance could be extremely boring, and well, I'm not going to mention anyone by name, but his initials are Jim Palin, and so, okay. So let's talk about a couple of things for the state of the town, and it's both what I think are some positives and then some concerns that I have that a number of you have also expressed. And let's touch on a few of these. So the first one, just in terms of positives, I think we really just have to start with our schools. Jill is going to talk about that from her perspective, but I really think that it's worth highlighting on my part because we have excellent communication between the town and the Board of Education. And I can't stress how important that is because even though the town doesn't directly manage the schools, that's the purview of the Board of Education. The fact that we're in constant communication means that we're all coordinated, we all have the same messaging, we both understand each other, and it really helps, I think, the Board of Education to have the rest of the town tuned in like it is, and it's something that I think has made a big difference. Another contributing factor is just the outstanding talent that we have managing our schools. That ranges from not just the Board of Education, but from the superintendent straight down. We have excellent, outstanding faculty and staff that are running these schools, and we should be happy about that. We should also be happy about the volunteers that support all that. I think practically every parent and anyone who's got anything to do with the schools has some volunteer capacity with schools in this town, and it's just amazing. I don't know if any of you know Michelle Seeney, John Seeney's wife, and you see the amount of work that that woman does to support the football program at Darien High School. Just having a chance to watch her in action is really just amazing. But it's just an example of the gold standard that we have for volunteers in this town. And that's one of the things that I think makes this place magical, and you can see the impact of that on our schools. So I think the next thing to talk about a little bit is property values. That's also a good news story, and there's a few facts that we'll run through tonight. So the first thing is that in terms of trends, you'll see at the top of this chart a trend in number of houses closed. So that's the number of private residences that actually sell in the years shown, and this is just the first 11 months of each year that I have on this chart. And what you see is about a 55% decline in sales since 2021, and that's a combination of factors. One, folks wanting to keep their low interest mortgages, but also two, I think, because frankly a lot of people like to live in Darien. We don't have people leaving town, and as a result, there aren't that many properties being sold and being listed for that matter. If you look at the bottom right-hand side of that chart, we have, as of November 2024, 20 listings for sale in this town. We only have 8 of them for houses that are below $2 million. 8 houses for sale out of a town of 22,000 people and probably 7,000 residents. That's it, right? So in one way, that's bad news because people who want to move to town, it's kind of slim pickings, right? But on the other hand, it's good news for current owners, right? You can see how prices have behaved just since last year, up 26% for the average sale price, and up 16% on a price per square foot basis. And so the message I would have is if you're long real estate, it's good for you and a good thing, I think, for our town and good for all of us. Another area to talk a little bit about are developments, kind of an obvious point, but if you look around and see all of the commercial developments that we have here in town, it really is amazing. We have far more real, what I would call retail options in town, not just stores, but restaurants. Think about what this place was like 10 years ago, and just go out and look at any one of these new developments that we have today. It is an astounding transformation. I get that at some point that's a lot to take in, but I think if you look at not just what we have, but the care and quality builders and developers like the Vaccaros, David Genovese, and others have taken with those properties, I think we can all say that we could retire for the amount of money we're spending at places like 1020, right? It's an amazing set of options that we have now that we just did not have just 10 years ago. And I think that's something that we should be excited and happy about. Another important aspect of those developments, though, is that I went out and I met with the Vaccaros over at the Heights Crossing that's looking pretty sharp over by Palmer's if you've been there. One of the things he said was that the general strategy is to put that retail on the first floor and then have apartments above that. And what they're trying to do is to mimic the experience that you would get in New York City, right? Because folks are used to retail on the ground floor and then they live above that. And when they leave their apartments, they got places to go and places to shop. And he's trying to replicate that there as other developers have. And so it's a great way to incorporate apartments into our town. Further to that, these developers, all but one that I'm aware of for one small complex, are incorporating affordable housing into their developments. 14% of those apartments that are being created are deemed affordable. And so it's good that we have this development, but it's also good that we're sending a message to Hartford that Darien is doing its part for affordable housing and that crisis that we have in this state. And I think we actually set an example for a lot of other towns because of what we've been able to do in that regard. I'd like to also talk another thing about sense of community and volunteer spirit. I don't know about you, but go out practically any weekend or certainly in any month, how many different things you can participate in, from parties and events to town-sponsored programs to private interests and businesses having something that you can participate in. It really is something. And just a sampling from these pictures here of things that we've seen that just give you a sense of community in this town and a sense of how great it is to live here. I mean, whether it was the old-fashioned Christmas this past weekend, which had a huge attendance, and an ice sculptor with a chainsaw. I don't know if you all saw that. I'd never actually seen one of those being done. It was very cool to seeing Chief Anderson retire and hand over the reins to Chief Marin and all the celebrations that were there for that, to the Oktoberfest that was over at the Garden Center, to the Stanley Cup when it came to town this past summer. If you had a chance to go to any of those things, where are you going to find community spirit like that? I mean, wasn't that terrific? Go to those things. I promise you, if you've had a down day, you will feel better after you go to that because it's a lot of fun to see that. And it's a lot of fun to go there and be there with other people. And I think as a town, whether it's the town programs or it's volunteers or it's businesses or residents, we all do an excellent job at pulling those things together. And you should feel really good about that. I certainly do every time I go to one. And I think they're absolutely terrific. So let's touch now on some concerns that I have that I think many of you share with me. So I think really at the top of the list has to be mental health. We have had a period of time where there have been no serious tragedies in this town, but it wasn't that long ago that we in fact had some of those. And I think it's very important that we keep that front and center, not just thinking about it from a town standpoint, but thinking about it in terms of our friends and neighbors, people who might be in need or in trouble, or even frankly for yourself or for your own family. There is no shame, none whatsoever, in admitting that you have a problem, in reaching out to somebody to get help from others. No shame whatsoever. We need to make sure we communicate that to friends, family, schools, everything. I know the school system and Dr. Hadley's and others are absolutely on top of this for the children there, but this is a problem that extends beyond children and extends to adults, and we should be mindful of the needs of other people. I had a chance recently to take the mental health first aid program that's offered by the social services in the town, and Allie Ramstack, who leads that effort. I have to tell you, that was eye-opening. I learned some things that I didn't know. I thought, for example, that it was very hard to detect in someone whether they would have a problem, and that many times it was just a surprise. That's wrong, right? There's a lot that you can do to see where others are standing and try to come up with some way to help them in a first aid capacity. So I would urge you, if you're interested, to look into that program and consider taking it yourself. I stood corrected on a number of things, and I'm a lot better at thinking about that thanks to that quality program. So do that if you have a chance. I'll thank also finally on that our mental health task force. I know Marcy Minnick participates in that, and it's an excellent forum for discussing these issues and keeping them in the forefront, but also helping us leverage best practice in other towns and in other places so that we're doing the most we can in this area of trouble. So next up, I think everybody's worried a bit about infrastructure and traffic. It's something that comes up pretty frequently, and if we think about just some recent examples, you'll recall that we had this broken sewer line down at Weed Beach just recently. That was really quite the scene to see that, by the way, and I have to just do a shout out. I don't know if you all followed this on social media, but so the pipe breaks, right? This is a sewer line that carries about 2/3 of the sewage out of Darien for treatment in Stamford. This was a non-trivial problem, okay? Within an hour and a half of when that happened, several companies with whom Public Works and Ed Gentile have contractual arrangements showed up on site. And I mean, they were here in force. They had giant vehicles. They had these huge vacuum trucks. The Public Works team was able to cordon off an area where the sewage was leaking, and those vacuum trucks would take it out and over to Stamford so that it could be treated. None of that spilled into our stormwater system, not into Long Island Sound, not into our residential community at all, and there was more than 100,000 gallons worth of sewage that spilled. That is a great testament to the sorts of things we have behind the scenes that you just do not see, right, with things like Public Works that keep us all out of trouble, and I'm just very impressed with all that. As impressive as that was, it's a reminder that these are old systems. This is not like a new community that was just built. This stuff is really old, and we're going to continue to have problems like that despite our best investments. This year, just more than $5.3 million that we're spending on upgrading and renewing our sewage treatment or sewage transit systems. We're still going to be dealing with an old system for a very long time, and so just be mindful of that when you see that. In terms of other infrastructure, we have a couple of flooding projects in process. I'm going to be talking about that separately at another time. But anybody remember that storm that came through in August, right? So that storm was a 1,000-year storm, okay? And it came across Connecticut, and it was about 30 or 40 miles north of us. As much as we would want to invest in storm systems, let me tell you right now, if that storm had come through Darien, Connecticut, there is nothing we could have invested to have helped us with that. That was a devastating storm. I sit on the board of the Region 1 DEMIS, which is the Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security for the state, and to sit in those meetings and listen to the devastation and see the photographs of what happened up there, thank God that that did not come our way. But everybody needs to be mindful that that could absolutely happen here. Now, we're going to continue to make as much progress as we can on our flood-related infrastructure, but there is a point where there is no amount of money we could reasonably pay that would fully insulate us from things like that, which is why I have the point up there about this notion of individual resilience. I remember a while back during the summer 21 storms, I was talking to a neighbor who got his basement flooded, and I had noticed that the water had come around and had gone in through his garage, which was not really kind of sealed. And I said, so what would have happened if you'd had some sandbags or those water things that you fill up there? What if you'd had that sort of blocking that off? He said, well, actually, I would have had no water. That's an interesting point. I would urge everybody here to not just track what we're doing in terms of flooding projects, but think about your own business. Think about your own residence. Is there something that you could do to make it a little bit more resilient? I think that's something we should all consider. I certainly am going to do that for my own account. Traffic is also worth mentioning. These are a couple of pictures from the post road. We had bad traffic in the middle of the day here, let alone traffic on the weekends. Has anybody had an experience where it takes 25 minutes to drive across the town of Darien because you're sitting in traffic? You know what I'm talking about. We've had this problem for a long time. Sitting in my office is a copy of this, which is indicative that we have been wrestling with problems of traffic on the post road since God was a boy, a long time. The reality is the post road is not something we can reasonably expand. You'll note that despite decades of problems with trucks going under that bridge at the Darien train station, the height of that bridge remains the same. We cannot easily fix this, and those roads are all controlled by the state. It's a state road. And there's not a lot we can change in terms of capacity on the post road. Maybe in some other areas in town, we're going to try to get a lot smarter on things like that. For example, you note that everybody really was upset and worried about traffic by Whole Foods. When they put in Whole Foods, oh my God, traffic's going to be terrible. They did engineering on that, and now around the Whole Foods, there's really no traffic problem over there. Same with what they're going to do at Heights Road and Hollow Tree Ridge, where the Heights crossing, that's going to go in. Look at West Road and Noroton when they put in those left turn lanes. Didn't that make a difference? Have some confidence that we can't solve all our traffic problems, but in terms of engineering and technology, the people who are working on this are really, really good, and I think we'll continue to kind of keep these traffic problems at bay. So I want to talk a little bit about tensions. So when I talk about tensions here in town, it's interesting to think about that we are always having arguments about something. Nature preservation versus development, trees versus sidewalks, dogs or no dogs on Great Island, which flags to fly at Town Hall, new buildings versus keeping things as they are. This tension is healthy and normal, and it actually says that we're all paying attention, that we all care about these things. We all have a point of view about how we think those things should be done. And that's a good thing, but it is also the single source in town, and let's be mindful of this, of incivility. I've watched too many times where there's an argument or a discussion about something where somebody gets pissed off and there's a shouting match. That does not speak well of us as a town. It does not set an example to kids who might be watching that. And so I want you to remember that anytime you get into a heated discussion with somebody in town or one of your colleagues about some issue. I was at a conference last week and I had a chance to sit down and speak at some length with Harry Rilling. So Harry is the mayor of Norwalk, and I didn't really know him. So you talk about long service. This guy had been 41 years in the Norwalk Police Department, 17 years as chief, retired from that, and he's now been mayor for 12 years. I think he's immortal. But he's a very good man, and we were talking about incivility, and we mentioned the golden rule, right? Treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. And he said, actually, I have a slightly different rule, which I give to police officers when they were being recruited. And he called it the platinum rule. And he says, imagine if you see an officer, and that officer had pulled over your child, your spouse, your parent. How would you like that officer to treat that person? And he says, that's the platinum standard. So that's the Harry Rilling standard, and frankly, I think that's what we should adopt here. I asked him if I could plagiarize that since I'm no longer in school, and he said yes. So please think about that in terms of what you could do to promote and preserve civility here in town. I want to talk a little bit about crime reports. That's something that comes up with some frequency, and we are certainly familiar with some of the issues that we have to deal with there. So it is unfortunate that we've got crime in this town. It's not something that's particularly new. We might be seeing a little bit more of it, but I think our police, they certainly have a handle on all of this, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I remind everybody there's more that we could do ourselves. So think about these things. These things are not things that we have never spoken about. Lock your cars. Lock your home if you're going to be away. Use your alarm on your cars or your home, and don't leave valuables so that they're visible, right? Another thing that comes up that's crime related is this notion of where do you get information about what happened, right? This is actually a pretty important point, and I want to stress this, that people should be getting their information as much as possible from official sources. We've had some issues with this because people are relying on social media or unreliable sources for the information that they're getting when there are reports of crime. So everybody's heard about this issue where there was a man in a car pulled over, and apparently a child in elementary school walking there, and everyone was worried that the guy was rolling down the window talking to this kid. So none of that, as far as I know, and there's been no arrest or no evidence that that actually happened. But boy, did that take on a life of its own, right? This almost turned into a frenzy. We had one report where the person being reported, it was targeted, said, well, here's another person doing exactly the same thing. It was an Uber Eats driver trying to drop off a meal for someone. And so my point is that these things can spin out of control. And when you see those things, take a moment and say, wait a minute, where am I getting my information on that? What could I do to get official confirmation? Police Department and Chief Marin are very, very good at trying to get that information out. If you're concerned about it, check them out on social media. They're very good at making sure the public knows what's going on through that vehicle. They're also very good at taking your call. If you've got a question, give the police department a call and they'll fill you in on that. But please keep that in mind when you're hearing about these things. The other thing I want to mention is this notion of letting the professionals do their job. I happened to be teaching a class at the high school on the day that we had this shelter in place. And the shelter in place came about, which you've read, which there were some potential threats that a student had made. And anyway, it all cleared up. There was no problem. But word gets out that that was happening. In fact, some kids were on their phones in that same classroom and had gotten word just before I got a word through my official contacts. It goes out that fast. And when that word goes out, it went out to all the parents. And I looked out the window, and there were police cars coming around to the high school, again, just to protect us all, and there were some civilian cars, and I thought, well, boy, detectives in unmarked vehicles, they're showing up as well. They were parents. We had parents 60 miles an hour going around that track to get over to the high school because they heard something was going on. I heard subsequently that there were parents that were calling and saying, well, we're out of town. We'll fly into town right away because this is clearly an emergency. It is entirely possible to overreact like that. And if everybody did that at once, these facilities would be overwhelmed, our emergency responders would be unable to respond, and people would be put in real danger. As hard as it is, I would urge you to please let the professionals do their job in these cases. Since I've been in this office for now more than a year, I've had a chance to really get to know our police department and the security-minded professionals that we have here in town. I'm telling you right now, we are served by top-tier professionals. You need to let them do their job. And when something like that happens, you should stay informed, you should be responsible, but please let those professionals come in and take care of that situation. We'll be well served by letting them do that. All right, it's time to spend some time on everybody's favorite topic. We need to talk about locking cars. I don't know what we need to do to make this happen in this town, but every time I hear, I will go ask the police and I will say, Chief, for the car thefts this month, what percentage of the car thefts were unlocked with the keys inside? The answer is 100%. 100% of these cars that are being stolen are unlocked with the keys in the vehicle. I don't know what to say. Anybody hear the joke about the two guys? They're out hiking in the woods, and one of them sees this bear coming and chasing after them, right? And the first one starts to run away, and he looks over at the other one's, reached down to his backpack, and he's putting on his running shoes. And the guy says, look, this bear's coming. He says, how could you not be running from the bear? He says, dude, I don't have to outrun the bear. I only have to outrun you. The reason I bring up that story is because by leaving cars unlocked, we're creating a reputation in the criminal community that Darien is the place to come in and steal these vehicles. If you think that word doesn't get out, you would be wrong, right? What would happen if we got religious about this, where people said, I'm going to lock this stuff up? Word goes out that this place is locked up like Fort Knox. They go to some other place to do what they do. So I don't know what additional campaigning we need to do to try to remind people of this. There was one family that has had four vehicles stolen out of their driveway because they left the keys in the vehicle unlocked. 4. I don't know what more we can do, but that's something that I think everybody needs to just recheck. And by the way, technology can help, right? I think Darien is Latin for land of brand new cars. So in my car, for example, there's a setting that you can put in there that says when you walk out of the car with your keys, the car will lock. And I use that. So I walk, yep, my car beeped and my car's locked. Right? If you have that technology on your car, take a look. You might be able to change that setting and take advantage of that as well. But again, please, let's try to focus more on that. So one last point I want to bring up in terms of concerns. I'm not a climate change crazy, and I mean that lovingly. But I am someone who's mindful of all that. And I think in the 21st century, anytime you read about not just climate change, but what we know about the dangers of some of these chemicals that are in our society and in our environment, from insecticides and pesticides and fertilizers to this whole PFAS controversy in terms of minute concentrations. I mean, something like a single drop in the equivalent of 5 Olympic-sized swimming pools is too much of that chemical to have in our water. It's that serious. I think as a town, we could do a lot more to be mindful about environmental needs in our town. And as I said, whether it's fertilizer or pesticide use, being thoughtful about not planting invasives, being more careful about nature generally, I think we can, and I think, frankly, we want to do better. I've learned a lot from some new friends that I have in this job, and I'll mention by name Natalie Tallis, Juliette Kane, and Julie Jones are 3 great folks, and they're very knowledgeable about a lot of things that pertain to nature in this town, and I've learned a lot by talking to them. And I think we should do more to try to consolidate and think more carefully about our environmental related committees. Right now they're spread out from the Advisory Committee on Sustainability to the Environmental Protection Commission, which is really about assessing building related environmental issues, and then of course the Coastal Advisory Commission. I think we could do a better job at sharpening that up, and I'll spend 2025 trying to think about how we could do a better job. Mind you, I don't think we need to go down the heavy-handed path of punishment and enforcement. I'm much more of someone who's oriented towards education and encouragement, and we could do more of that, and I look forward to strengthening our approach in 2025. Okay, so some quick project updates. Henley Holmes Royal, if you've been following that, the way these processes work is even though it's a school building, the Board of Selectmen actually oversees the construction of these buildings through the appointment of a building committee, and these are some photographs of that construction that's underway in those three places. I had a chance to see some of that on the school tours this past weekend, and they are making phenomenal progress. A few notes here, as you can see, they're about 25% finished with all of that work across all three schools. It's pretty impressive. Despite the rain we've had in August, it was pretty dry this fall, and so they're on or ahead of schedule. Scope seems to be manageable. There aren't any undue change orders, and there's been a lot of good transparency with the neighbors addressing their concerns with construction activity near their homes. Once again, I think the key has been people. We've got outstanding folks who are in charge of this. I've watched ONGAP construction. They did all the work on Ox Ridge, and they did one other building I was affiliated with elsewhere. My God, these guys are good. It really is something to watch them work. But we're also well served by the volunteers who are helping us with this, Chris Price and Jill sitting on as chairs of the building committee, and of course Kevin Munret, who leads facilities for the school systems. These are outstanding individuals, and we can thank them for the progress that they've made to date on that. So I want to talk a little bit about Great Island, and then I'll have some comments to wrap things up. So I don't want to give kind of an update on where that stands, but I want to make a few kind of high-level comments to kind of reframe our process around Great Island. So once we purchased it, I think the key question that we had to answer, which is what process do we need to come up with, right, that's going to give us a strategy that works best for Darien, that works for most people most of the time. And what we've done here is we have adopted a building committee approach. It seemed to work well with Ox Ridge. It's working great with Henley Holmes Royal, and I'll do a shout out here to former First Selectman Jamie Stevenson. She was the one who had the idea to put that in place for all of our large projects over $1 million, and real credit goes to her because we've stuck with that strategy, and I think we've been well served by the quality of building projects that we've had as a result of all that. So the structure that we have looks like this. The Board of Selectmen created the Great Island Advisory Committee. It has 5 elected officials on it, 2 members from the Board of Selectmen as well as others. And that group, that includes also 4 experienced citizens, if you will, went through a selection process and selected a consulting firm called Reed Hildebrand. They are landscape architects, and they are world-class in what they do. This is all they do. They have done projects like this all over the United States, hundreds and hundreds of them, to a great level of quality and expertise, and I think we're extremely well served by having them here. But let's be clear about the roles of each of these groups. So if you think about it, from the bottom, Reed Hildebrand is about a process that we need to follow in order to get to this solution. Sometimes it takes time, sometimes it seems a bit slow, but they're taking us through a process that will enable us to get to a good strategy that works for most people most of the time. And their job is to come in and help us gather feedback, get information to support our decision, collect input from our citizens through surveys and workshops, and help synthesize all that and present some ideas and recommendations for the Great Island Committee to consider. But the Board of Selectmen is looking to the Great Island Committee to come up with the formal proposals as to what we're going to do. That's their job, not Reed Hildebrand's job. And then finally, once we get to a recommendation, it'll be the Board of Selectmen's job to vote on that and make a decision as to what we're going to do. Before I get into this timeline, I really want to do a shout out to Monica McNally. She has chaired this committee since I took over as first selectman, and I can tell you she works 40 hours a week on it. She spends an inordinate amount of time with a lot of different constituencies trying to get that right. I would like a round of applause for her efforts. All right, so what's the current status? Here's a little Gantt chart that just shows you this, and it's interesting to recall that we really started this right when Monica took office. We got word that Great Island was going to be for sale, and there was a very long and protracted process that was led by Monica and Board of Finance Chairman Jim Palin to go through and negotiate the purchase of this island. It was an extraordinarily complex effort that required a lot of talent and a lot of time to actually sort through all the issues. But we got to a closing, and it took so long, I actually ended up signing the final documents that enabled us to kind of declare victory on that particular process. In the fall of '23, we formed the Great Island Advisory Committee, and they spent a good part of their time getting organized around this so that our first thing could be done, which was getting access to the island for people, preparing the site, eventually dogs, which we now have, but it's all been part of a thoughtful process that's been able to get us to that point. Reed Hildebrand came on this past summer, and they started to help us form a process around gathering citizen input, keeping it organized, and bringing their best practice to this process. What they're going to deliver at the end of sort of phase 1, phase 2, which is what we're in right now, that's going to be next summer, and they're going to deliver a vision and master plan. And then after that, depending on what we all approve as the vision and master plan, there will be a construction planning and construction administration phase of indeterminate length. Okay? So what precisely can we expect when that vision and master plan is ready? So a vision document is going to provide us with some guiding principles about what Great Island is and what we want it to be, and importantly, what it is not. It's going to have a long-term view about how we think about it and what we expect as a community, and it's going to have frameworks for decision-making that we have to undertake in the future. So when big things come up, it'll provide a framework about how we do it, how we gather public input, and how we reach a conclusion on that decision. As for the master plan, that'll have detailed design principles about how we're actually going to build out the island itself and what decisions we'll make. They'll have assessments of the site as well as the buildings themselves, of which there are quite a few. They'll give us some conceptual designs and scenarios for us to pick from, and then of course a final selected concept site plan along with a phasing strategy and a cost estimate. Importantly, all of that work on the vision and master plan is going to have input from the public through these workshops, surveys, and frankly any other way you want to provide feedback, from the leadership on the Great Island Committee, as well as from Reed Hildebrand and their expertise and long experience with this. When we get the master plan, it's going to address some big questions that I know all of you have. What is the right balance between nature and development? How do we actually strike that? What the heck are we going to do with all these buildings? That's a question I have. What are we going to do about parking and vehicle access? How much parking do we want? How much do we want vehicle access? What are we going to do in terms of hospitality businesses or things like restaurants? Are we going to have a snack bar or not? I don't know. And then finally, what about municipal assets like a pool or ice rink? These are all things that people have talked about or mentioned during the surveys and workshops that we've had. The master plan is going to come up with a set of options for that the Great Island Committee will finalize and then recommend to the Board of Selectmen. Again, a transparent process where you can provide feedback at any time. I want to give an update on 23A. So you'll recall that the 23A, it's an access road, and what it is it's this little space right here where the road that goes from basically Rings End Bridge at Pear Tree Point Road, and it's a little road that goes up to the traffic circle that's right there at the entrance of 23A. So the town owns that road and that traffic circle, which is our main access point to get into Great Island. So what's happened with that is that because we've switched from a residential or private use to a municipal use, unless we come up with a strategy where there are precisely zero private vehicles on Great Island, we're going to have to widen that road. And there's not really anything we can do to change that. What's happened is that, unfortunately, unless we just decide we don't want cars at all on Great Island, we're going to have to do that, and it's going to entail cutting down about 15 gorgeous, healthy, mature Norway spruces along this road. It's sad to see that happen, but it's something that we have to have if we're going to widen that road. So paired with that, though, is a robust replanting plan, and so we are taking that seriously, and in fact, anytime we cut down trees of that size in town, we do have a robust plan that's elsewhere in town as well. We're going to make sure that gets replanted in a smart and professional way. Now, you've heard that there have been 2 appeals to this decision filed. So the process is the town decides to take the trees down, they post that decision. If someone doesn't like that, and the public can do that, they can complain to the tree warden and file an appeal. There's a hearing, the tree warden considers that evidence. In this case, the tree warden ruled in favor of the town, and then 2 citizens appealed the tree warden's decision, which you can do by filing an appeal in Stamford Superior Court, and that's what they did. So we're working right now with the town council to deal with that. They are defending the town's position in court. They will put in motions to dismiss both of those cases, but that's going to take time, well into 2025, and it's going to take money to do that. I assure you right now, as God is my witness, if I could see that there was a different way to do this, that it did not entail taking down those trees, I assure you that we would do it. But I have looked at this 9 ways to Sunday, and unless we come up with a strategy that says there are no vehicles on Great Island, there is no way to avoid this. So we will get through this process, but I want to make sure everybody kind of had that update. So what can you do for Great Island, right? So the first thing is to participate, right? We really do want your voice. We want to make sure that you have a chance to express yourself in workshops, surveys, talking to the Great Island Committee members or attending their meetings, reaching out to those members or other elected officials, or me. If you want to talk to me about this, I will be happy to speak to you. We also have a new website set up for Great Island that also provides a chance for you to do that. The other point I would make is to have faith in the process. Part of the reason I talked about the professionalism of Reed Hildebrand and the expertise we've assembled on this committee is that these professionals and those committee members are highly motivated to make sure that we get this right, and I have a lot of confidence that they will do that. And then finally, I would ask everybody to be patient and accepting. As I said before, a quality, careful plan is going to take some time to develop. I promise you're going to be happy with it, but keep in mind that even the best plan is not going to please everybody. You cannot make everybody happy with every aspect of this plan. And that's the law of physics. You can't get beyond that. And so I would urge everybody to be accepting of the best plan that we can possibly come up with and get out and enjoy Great Island. So that's all I have to say about that. A few more things and we're done. I want to have a couple of points about looking ahead. You have to be of a certain age to recognize this gentleman. I think we all miss that. I don't have an envelope up here, but I'll dispense with that. So a couple of things. A number of people have mentioned sidewalk infrastructure in town and a real interest in pursuing accelerated investments in that. A number of folks would like to have more opportunities for their children to walk to elementary schools or the middle school or high school. I can assure you that all the low-hanging fruit for sidewalks has been picked in this town. It is actually quite difficult to put in new sidewalks, whether there are trees in the way or the road or the area where we need the sidewalk is owned by private landowners or it's a state road. I'm not saying that to say, no, we can't do sidewalks. I'm just saying that we ought to have a pretty good process for figuring out what we're going to do that's more than what we're doing right now. In 2015, there was a pedestrian infrastructure advisory committee. I think that was pretty good. The problem with that was that it was all citizen-led, and it wasn't our building committee structure where you have a committee paired with an expert. And so we're going to do that. I would like a consultant-led process, somebody who can expertly help us prioritize our sidewalk investments, smartly put them where we'll get the most use out of them, and then help us assess what is going to be required to get there with citizen input to help in prioritization, and we will get that done. Parking, I've come across a company that I think could get us to where we do not have parking tags for any parking in town at train stations or elsewhere. So that's coming, and I hope to get that done this year. Pear Tree Point and Weed Beach, I won't talk more about those other than to say that we are going to put those into the capital plans this year, and I think we should consider them. Pear Tree Point, just to protect that beach, that's important. And frankly, the short lane project at Weed Beach, that just needs to be developed, and we need to finish that. Cherry Lawn traffic study, lots of traffic because of the new playground over there, so a shout out to everybody who made that happen, but every kid that I see on there is having a great time. I haven't talked about flooding or long-range capital because I'm going to do a couple of videos on that in the next 30 to 45 days to explain where those projects stand. And then a few more, which I'll cut off because I've talked too long, but our New Canaan Line Quiet Zone Study, that's something I'm also working on. Town boards and commissions, we got a lot of confusion with all of that I think even some charter changes will be required to straighten that out. And then finally, the Blight Commission has recommended a couple of properties for foreclosure. We've never done that as a town. We've never foreclosed on a property because of blight fines. We are about to do that. It's time to enforce those rules. Those two properties are going to the Board of Selectmen next week, and I'm personally going to vote in favor to foreclose on those properties. And message to the community, I get that some of these are difficult situations, but those are the rules. And if you have a significant accumulation of blight fines, we're coming, and we're going to enforce these rules. Okay, last thing for looking ahead, a shameless promotion. Please sign up for the town's newsletter. We put out I think a very good newsletter led by our communications expert Marley Hayes. If you haven't done that, please send an email and get signed up for that. Lots of good information. I put out the town newsletter, and then I alternate Fridays. I'll put out my own personal newsletter. Follow us on social media. Look us up and take a look. You'll get a lot of updates as to what's going on. And a few thank yous to wrap this up. I will maintain again, we have the best town hall staff of any town in the state of Connecticut. As you know, Kate Bush left us as our town administrator, and both Susan Barksdale and Jen Charneski stepped up, managed not just their own jobs, but Kate's job as well since her departure. Ed Gentile and the Public Works team with that whole sewer thing, and not just that, but 50 other things that they do, from Great Island to everything else, miracle workers. I don't know how they do it, but we are well served by that team. Jeremy Ginsburg in Planning and Zoning. There is no more calm or gracious person in Town Hall, and the way they deliver their expertise in a fair fashion, I think we are well served by that. Joan Hendrickson, record Treasury earnings. We have never earned as much money as we have for money in the bank as we have in the last couple of years, and it's thanks to Joan's efforts on all that, so I appreciate all that. Our registrars, that whole team that put together this past election, I mean, it wasn't just Kara and Susan, our elected registrars, but it was their deputies, Corey and Tracy, as well as Eric Yostin, and more than 100 volunteers that manned those polling stations over all this extended voting, and it was done without any mistakes. It's really quite amazing. And then frankly, everybody in Town Hall, again, you were all amazing, but I really have to thank all of our volunteers. There are hundreds and hundreds of people that make things work in this town, and it's absolutely amazing. So in closing, people have asked me what I've thought about my first year as being first selectman, and it really has been great. I feel like I'm surrounded by wonderful people, the town hall staff, department heads, it's citizens. It's really just a kind of a enveloping. No, seriously, my answer to that question is that it's a privilege. As long as I hold this job, I will do everything I humanly possibly can to make Darien what I think is the best place in the world to live. That's all I have. Thank you for listening.